Lady stopped mid-whimper, her German shepherd ears frozen in perfect alert position as the morning mist swirled around Forsyth Park. The distinguished canine collar caught the first rays of Georgia's sunlight, but her desperate eyes weren't begging for food. They were counting down to something far more terrible. A jogger stumbled backward, coffee spilling across the sidewalk. "Jesus, that's a police dog," he whispered, fumbling for his phone as 5 tiny puppies mewled beneath Lady's trembling body. The elderly woman feeding pigeons dropped her breadcrumbs, remembering her daughter's final moments, how animals sense death before humans ever do. Lady's whimper pierced the dawn silence like a siren, each note carefully trained, urgently measured. "Someone call animal control," a passerby shouted. But Lady's amber eyes tracked past them all, focusing on something beyond the park, something only she could smell, something dying. What was this decorated canine officer really protecting? And why did every fiber of her being scream that time was running out? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Dorothy Dot Sullivan had walked this same route through Forsyth Park every morning for 5 years, ever since Sarah's funeral made staying home unbearable. At 67, her Irish-American stubborn streak kept her moving despite arthritic knees and a Social Security check that barely covered groceries. This morning felt different. The November air carried something heavier than Spanish moss and magnolia blossoms. The German shepherd caught her attention first, not because of the desperate whimpering that had drawn a small crowd, but because of the faded SPD canine collar that gleamed against her black and tan coat. Dot's 30 years as a military nurse had taught her to recognize the details others missed. And this wasn't just any abandoned dog. This was a decorated officer. "Poor thing's been here since dawn," muttered Agnes Fletcher, the 82-year-old neighbor who fed stray cats with religious devotion. 5 babies underneath her, skinny as rails, but she won't move. And just keeps staring toward Gordon Street like she's waiting for orders. Dot studied the shepherd's behavior with professional interest. Lady, the nameplate was barely visible through wear, wasn't exhibiting typical stray dog desperation. Her posture remained disciplined, alert. Even protecting 5 6-week-old puppies, she maintained the bearing of a working dog. Something was wrong with this picture. "Animal control's backed up through Thursday," announced a jogger, pocketing his phone with obvious relief at passing the responsibility along. "Probably just dumped them at the kill shelter anyway. Shame, really. Beautiful dog like that." The dismissive tone ignited something fierce in Dot's chest. She'd spent decades watching people write off the inconvenient, the broken, the burdensome. After losing her daughter and husband within 3 years, she understood abandonment intimately. But this felt different. Lady's eyes held intelligence that spoke of purpose, not panic. Dot's fixed income at every dollar was calculated, every expense weighed against survival. Her Victorian home on Bull Street, inherited from her parents, was paid off but needed constant repair she couldn't afford. The thought of veterinary bills, food for 6 mouths, potential property damage, it all screamed financial suicide for a woman living on $1,247 monthly. Yet something about Lady's unwavering focus toward Gordon Street nagged at her nursing instincts. In 40 years of medical service, Dot had learned to trust gut feelings that preceded logical diagnosis. This dog wasn't begging for food or shelter. She was trying to communicate something urgent, something that transcended her own desperate circumstances. "God never gives you more than you can handle," Dot whispered, her mother's favorite phrase feeling hollow against the morning's weight. But as Lady's amber eyes met hers across the growing crowd of onlookers, Dot felt the first stirring of purpose she'd experienced since Sarah's death. Maybe God wasn't giving her more than she could handle. Maybe He was finally giving her exactly what she needed, a reason to feel useful again. The puppy's weak mewling decided it. Dot pulled her arthritis medication from her purse, swallowed tomorrow's dose early, and approached the most important decision of her remaining years. Dot approached Lady with the careful movements learned from decades of coaxing frightened patience. The German Shepherd's ears twitched, acknowledging her presence without breaking her vigilant stare toward Gordon Street. Up close, the dog's condition told a story of deliberate sacrifice, ribs visible through dull coat, but her puppies were plump and healthy. She'd been giving them everything while keeping nothing for herself. "Easy, girl," Dot murmured, extending her hand palm up. Lady's nose twitched, processing scents with the methodical thoroughness of professional training. The interaction felt different from typical stray encounters. This dog was evaluating Dot's trustworthiness, not begging for mercy. Lady's response surprised everyone watching. Instead of cowering or aggressive posturing, she performed a perfect sit-stay command, then looked pointedly toward Gordon Street and back to Dot. The sequence repeated 3 times with mechanical precision. "She's trying to tell you something," Agnes observed from behind her walker. "Smart as a whip, that one. Been doing the same thing all morning. Sit, look, wait, like she's on duty." Dot's military training recognized the pattern immediately. Lady wasn't randomly agitated, she was following protocol. K-9 officers were taught specific alert behaviors for different situations. This wasn't drug detection posturing or attack preparation. This was something else entirely, something that made Lady's entire body quiver with barely contained urgency. The first attempt to help revealed Lady's true nature. When Dot offered half her breakfast granola bar, Lady sniffed politely but refused to eat. Instead, she nudged the food toward her puppies, then resumed her focused surveillance of the distant street. The maternal instinct was strong, but it was secondary to whatever mission consumed her attention. "You've got something more important than breakfast, don't you, girl?" Dot whispered, studying Lady's behavior with growing fascination. The dog's ears swiveled toward every siren in the distance, her body tensing into alert position before relaxing when the sound faded. Muscle memory from years of emergency response. A middle-aged businessman paused during his morning jog, shaking his head dismissively. "Just strays, ma'am. Animal control will handle it eventually. No point getting involved. Probably diseased or aggressive. City's full of abandoned animals." His casual dismissal triggered something protective in Dot's chest. She'd heard similar callousness in hospital corridors when discussing indigent patients or terminal cases deemed not worth the effort. The assumption that suffering could be categorized, prioritized, or ignored based on convenience made her jaw clench with familiar anger. But Lady's response to the jogger's presence proved most revealing. Rather than defensive posturing or submissive cowering, she performed another textbook alert sequence. Ears forward, body rigid, focused attention. She was still working, still following training that transcended her current circumstances. As the morning crowd thinned, Dot noticed Lady's increasing agitation. The dog began pacing in tight circles around her puppies, checking the sun's position obsessively. Whatever she was monitoring had a time element. This wasn't passive waiting. This was active countdown to something critical. "You're running out of time, aren't you?" Dot asked softly. Lady's response was immediate and heartbreaking, a low whine that spoke of desperate frustration. She understood human speech well enough to recognize sympathy, but sympathy wasn't what she needed. The breakthrough came when Dot made a decision that defied both financial logic and personal safety. Instead of calling animal control or walking away like every other passerby, she stood up slowly and addressed Lady directly. "Show me," she said simply. Lady's transformation was instantaneous. Her ears perked forward, tail lifted slightly, the first sign of hope she'd displayed all morning. She took 3 careful steps toward Gordon Street, then looked back to ensure Dot was following. When Dot nodded and took a corresponding step, Lady's entire demeanor shifted from desperate pleading to professional efficiency. The journey began with Dot cradling the weakest puppy, a tiny female whose breathing seemed labored, while Lady led them away from the park's safety toward Savannah's more questionable neighborhoods. With each block, the Victorian elegance of the historic district gave way to urban decay and abandoned properties. Lady maintained perfect canine formation throughout their slow procession, checking back regularly to ensure Dot could keep pace despite her arthritis. The dog's consideration for human limitations suggested extensive training in civilian protection scenarios. This wasn't just police work, this was specialized canine partnership behavior. As they approached Gordon Street, Lady's urgency intensified. Her pace quickened, her alert signals became more frequent, and her breathing grew shallow with anticipation. Whatever waited ahead represented both the culmination of her vigil and the reason 5 innocent puppies had been born into such desperate circumstances. Dot's nursing instincts screamed warnings about following an unknown animal into unfamiliar territory, but something deeper than professional caution compelled her forward. In Lady's determined stride and unwavering focus, she recognized the same dedication that had driven her through countless emergency situations. They were both veterans of life and death decisions, both trained to respond when others couldn't or wouldn't. The abandoned house at 412 East Gordon Street waited ahead, holding secrets that would transform both their lives forever. The abandoned Victorian at 412 East Gordon Street stood like a monument to neglect, its once proud wraparound porch sagging under peeling paint and broken dreams. Lady's behavior transformed the moment they reached the property line. Her disciplined canine composure gave way to frantic urgency as she circled the house in a trained search pattern, nose to the ground, ears constantly swiveling. Dot followed slowly, the weakest puppy still cradled against her chest, its shallow breathing a constant reminder of how fragile life could be. The neighborhood's decay was more pronounced here. Overgrown yards, boarded windows, the kind of urban blight that city officials ignored until property values demanded attention. This wasn't a place where a 67-year-old woman should be walking alone, but Lady's desperation overrode every safety instinct Dot possessed. The first sound stopped them both cold. Faint, almost inaudible beneath the morning traffic noise, but unmistakably human, a low moan of distress coming from the basement level. Lady's ears snapped to attention, her entire body going rigid with the focused intensity Dot had seen in combat medics responding to wounded soldiers. This was it. This was why Lady had been maintaining her vigil, why she'd sacrificed her own health to stay near this house. "Someone's in there," Dot whispered, her military training kicking in automatically. She'd triaged enough emergency situations to recognize the difference between pain and mortal danger. Whatever waited in that basement was critical, possibly terminal. Lady didn't wait for human decision-making. With the fluid efficiency of professional training, she located the basement window, partially open, just wide enough for a determined German shepherd to squeeze through. The sight of Lady forcing herself through that narrow space, leaving her vulnerable puppies behind, spoke to a level of commitment that transcended mere animal instinct. This was duty, pure and simple. The sounds from below grew clearer as Dot pressed her ear to the window. Labored breathing, occasional moans, and underneath it all, the soft whimpering of Lady trying to provide comfort to someone beyond human help. Dot's nursing experience translated those sounds immediately. Respiratory depression, altered consciousness, possible overdose situation requiring immediate medical intervention. Her hands shook as she fumbled for her phone, muscle memory from countless emergency calls guiding her fingers. 911, what's your emergency? The operator's voice cut through her mounting panic. I need paramedics at 412 East Gordon Street, possible drug overdose, unconscious victim in the basement. Dot managed, surprised by how steady her own voice sounded. 40 years of medical emergencies had taught her that panic was a luxury she couldn't afford when someone's life hung in the balance. The window was too small for Dot to follow Lady's route, but the basement door around the side of the house stood slightly ajar, whether from Lady's intervention or simple neglect she couldn't tell. Her arthritic knees protested every step down the concrete stairs, but the scene that greeted her validated every risk she'd taken that morning. Tyler Thornton lay unconscious on a filthy mattress, his 16-year-old face blue-tinged from oxygen deprivation. A needle lay beside his outstretched arm, and the sweet, acrid smell of fentanyl hung heavy in the basement air. Lady positioned herself across his chest, her warm body providing what little heat his failing system could absorb, her tongue methodically licking his face in an attempt to stimulate consciousness. Dot's medical training engaged automatically. She checked Tyler's pulse, weak and irregular, and his breathing, shallow, maybe 6 breaths per minute when it should have been 16. His skin was cold and clammy, his lips nearly purple. Without immediate intervention, he had minutes, not hours. "Come on, son," she murmured, tilting his head back to clear his airway while Lady continued her desperate attempts at revival. "Don't you dare give up on me now." The intimate familiarity between Lady and this boy was obvious. She knew exactly where to position herself for maximum warming effect, how to stimulate his face without causing injury. This wasn't their first crisis together. The paramedics arrived with the efficiency Dot remembered from her own emergency response days, but their reaction to Lady's presence surprised her. Instead of removing the dog as a contamination risk, the lead EMT, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, actually smiled. "Well, I'll be damned." "Lady, what are you doing here?" He knelt beside the dog, who allowed him to work around her without moving from Tyler's chest. "This is Tyler Thornton, right? Jimmy's boy?" The casual recognition sent shivers down Dot's spine. These people knew Tyler, knew Lady, knew their history. This wasn't a random overdose in an abandoned house. This was part of an ongoing tragedy that the entire emergency response community had been witnessing. As they administered Narcan and prepared Tyler for transport, his revival was slow but steady. His first conscious words, spoken through the oxygen mask with desperate clarity, cut through everyone's professional composure. "Lady, what are you? How did you find me again?" The word "again" hung in the air like an accusation. This wasn't Tyler's first overdose, and it wasn't Lady's first rescue mission. The dog's vigil in the park, her desperate attempts to get help, her trained responses, it all pointed to a pattern of surveillance and intervention that defied conventional understanding of animal behavior. "Don't call my dad," Tyler whispered to the paramedic as they loaded him onto the gurney. "Please, he can't know about this. He's already been through enough." But Lady's reaction to Tyler's words revealed another layer of complexity. Instead of the relief Dot expected after a successful rescue, the dog's behavior became increasingly agitated. She refused to leave Tyler's side, even when the ambulance doors closed, somehow communicating to the EMTs that her job wasn't finished. Whatever had driven her to maintain that vigil in the park extended far beyond this single crisis. As the ambulance pulled away with Lady riding beside Tyler's gurney, Dot stood alone in the basement that reeked of desperation and near death. The puppies in her arms reminded her that Lady's sacrifice went deeper than anyone realized. She'd given birth to these vulnerable creatures not out of accident, but as cover for a mission that demanded her constant presence near this house, near this boy who clearly meant more to her than her own survival. The first twist was becoming clear. Lady wasn't an abandoned canine officer. She was an active guardian, still on duty, still protecting someone who needed her more than life itself. The sterile fluorescent lights of Savannah General's emergency department cast everything in harsh relief as Dot settled into an uncomfortable plastic chair, 5 puppies whimpering softly in the makeshift carrier she'd fashioned from her winter coat. Hospital security had initially balked at Lady's presence, but the German Shepherd's calm demeanor and obvious medical training had somehow earned her an exception to the no animals policy. She lay beneath Tyler's gurney like a furry guardian angel, her eyes never leaving his face. Dr. Elizabeth Matthews, a sharp-eyed emergency physician in her 40s, emerged from behind the curtained area with the grim expression Dot had seen too many times during her nursing career. "Mrs. Sullivan, is it? The boy's asking for you." Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd delivered too much bad news to too many families. "This is his 3rd overdose in 6 months. Each time that dog somehow led someone to him just in time." The revelation hit Dot like a physical blow. Tyler's whispered words in the ambulance, "How did you find me again?" suddenly made terrible sense. Lady hadn't been abandoned at all. She'd been working, systematically saving this boy's life over and over again, each rescue more desperate than the last. The puppies weren't an accident. They were camouflage, giving Lady a plausible reason to remain visible in public while maintaining her impossible vigil. "Doctor, who is this boy?" Everyone seems to know him and Lady, but no one's explaining why a retired K-9 officer is playing guardian angel to a teenage addict. Dot's nursing background demanded clear information before she could make any rational decisions about her growing involvement. Dr. Matthews glanced around the busy emergency department before lowering her voice. "Tyler Thornton is Captain Jimmy Thornton's son. Jimmy was one of Savannah PD's best K-9 handlers until he took medical retirement 2 years ago. Word around here is that Jimmy couldn't handle Tyler's addiction problems and just disappeared. Left the boy to fend for himself." Her expression softened as she watched Lady through the glass partition. But apparently, he didn't take his partner with him. The pieces began forming a picture that both inspired and horrified Dot. A decorated police captain, faced with his son's self-destructive spiral, had somehow made the impossible choice to leave Lady behind as Tyler's protector. The dog's behavior wasn't emotional attachment, it was professional duty, carried out with the dedication that had made her an exemplary K-9 officer. Dot spent the next hour in the hospital cafeteria, bottle-feeding the puppies with supplies purchased from the gift shop, while researching Tyler's case on her phone. Local news archives painted a tragic picture. Captain James Thornton, 25-year veteran, forced into early retirement due to medical issues. His son Tyler, honor roll student until age 14 when his grades plummeted and behavioral problems began. Missing person reports filed and withdrawn. A family disintegrating under pressures that remained frustratingly vague in every article. Officer Mike Rodriguez found her there around noon, his uniform crisp despite obvious exhaustion. "Ma'am, I'm Mike Rodriguez, Lady's current handler at SPD. Or I was until Captain Thornton told us he'd found her a good home upstate." His confusion was genuine, tinged with guilt. "Seeing her here, with Tyler, it doesn't make sense. Jimmy swore he'd taken her to a farm family in North Carolina." Dot studied the young officer's face, recognizing the look of someone whose worldview was cracking under the weight of new information. "Officer Rodriguez, when exactly did Captain Thornton retire? And what were these medical issues everyone mentions but won't specify?" Mike's shoulders sagged as he settled into the adjacent plastic chair. "Jimmy took disability retirement in March 2023. Pancreatic cancer, stage 4. He had maybe 6 months to live, according to the department doctors." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That was 20 months ago. We all assumed he'd passed quietly somewhere, probably taking Lady with him when his time came." The timeline crystallized with devastating clarity. Jimmy Thornton had been dying of cancer while his son spiraled into addiction. Faced with the certainty of leaving Tyler orphaned and vulnerable, He'd made a decision that most people would consider impossible. He'd assigned Lady to protect Tyler, then disappeared rather than burden his son with watching him die slowly. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need to ask you something important." Mike's training was evident in his direct approach. "How did you find Tyler this morning?" "Lady's been missing for 2 years. The department assumed she was dead or living happily on some farm. But here she is, with Puppies, somehow still connected to the Thornton family." Dot explained her morning encounter, Lady's desperate behavior in the park, the systematic way the dog had led her to Tyler's location. With each detail, Mike's expression grew more troubled. Finally, he pulled out his phone and showed her a series of incident reports. "Look at these dates," he said, scrolling through emergency calls. "August 15th, Tyler Thornton overdose. Anonymous caller led paramedics to victim. October 3rd, same thing. December 12th, again. Every single time, the caller was described as elderly female, possibly local resident, refused to give name but knew exact location of victim." His eyes met Dot's with growing realization. "Lady's been recruiting people to save Tyler for months." "You're just the first one who actually followed through completely." The magnitude of Lady's intelligence and dedication overwhelmed Dot's understanding of animal behavior. This dog had developed a systematic rescue protocol, using her training and natural charisma to manipulate compassionate strangers into becoming Tyler's unknowing saviors. The puppies weren't just camouflage, they were emotional leverage, designed to elicit maximum sympathy from potential helpers. Dr. Matthews returned with updated test results and a grim prognosis. "Tyler's stable for now, but his system shows extensive damage from repeated overdoses. His brain went without oxygen for several minutes this morning. We won't know the full extent of potential cognitive damage for days or weeks." She paused, clearly struggling with professional boundaries. "Mrs. Sullivan, this boy has no family on record, no insurance, no support system. If he recovers fully, he'll be discharged to the streets unless someone steps forward as guardian." The financial reality crashed over Dot like a cold wave. Her Social Security income of $1,247 monthly was already stretched thin. Taking responsibility for Tyler would mean veterinary bills for Lady and 5 puppies, food, clothing, potential medical expenses, and the enormous cost of addiction treatment. Her modest savings account, $3,847 accumulated over 5 years of careful penny pinching, wouldn't cover a week of intensive care. Yet as she watched Lady through the waiting room window, still maintaining her vigilant position beside Tyler's bed, Dot felt something shift inside her chest. This wasn't about financial capability anymore. This was about moral obligation to a dog who'd somehow maintained faith in human goodness despite being abandoned by the one person she'd served with absolute loyalty. Tyler regained consciousness late that afternoon, his first words a mixture of confusion and resignation. "Lady, you can stop now. I'm not worth saving anymore." The defeat in his voice, spoken to a dog who'd risked everything to keep him alive, broke something inside Dot's heart that had been carefully protected since Sarah's death. She entered his room quietly, Lady's tail giving a single wag of acknowledgement. "Tyler, my name is Dorothy Sullivan. Lady brought me to you this morning. I think we need to talk about your father." The boy's reaction was immediate and violent. "My father's dead to me. He dumped both Lady and me when things got tough. Don't waste your time trying to convince me he's some kind of hero." His anger was brittle, covering deeper pain that Dot recognized from her own grieving process. "Son, your father didn't dump Lady. He stationed her here to protect you." "There's a difference." Dot pulled up the news articles on her phone, showing Tyler the timeline of his father's cancer diagnosis, his medical retirement, the careful orchestration of Lady's apparent abandonment. "Captain Jimmy Thornton is dying, Tyler. He's been dying since before he left. Lady isn't abandoned, she's on active duty." The information hit Tyler like a physical assault. His vital signs spiked on the monitor, bringing nurses running, but the emotional damage was already done. Everything he'd believed about his father's betrayal, every ounce of rage that had fueled his self-destructive behavior, crumbled under the weight of a love so profound it had required him to believe he was unloved. As Tyler processed this revelation, Dot made a decision that would have seemed impossible that morning. She pulled out her phone and called her bank, requesting information about home equity loans against her fully paid Victorian house. The customer service representative was polite but discouraging. "At your age, Mrs. Sullivan, taking on new debt could jeopardize your financial security." But watching Lady's unwavering dedication to Tyler, seeing the boy's desperate need for family, Dot realized that financial security meant nothing without purpose. Her house was just a building where she'd been slowly dying of loneliness. Tyler and Lady represented something far more valuable, the chance to matter again, to use her nursing skills and maternal instincts for something beyond mere survival. "I'd like to apply for a loan," she told the bank representative, her voice steady despite the magnitude of the decision. "I'm about to become a grandmother, and family requires investment." The irony wasn't lost on her. God had indeed given her more than she could handle, but only because he knew she was stronger than she'd believed possible. November 22nd arrived with the cruel irony of Thanksgiving approaching while Tyler Thornton lay dying in Savannah General's intensive care unit. His second overdose in 18 hours had triggered massive organ failure, and the machines surrounding his bed beeped out a rhythm that sounded increasingly like a funeral dirge. Lady hadn't moved from her position on the cold hospital floor in 36 hours, refusing food, water, and the concerned ministrations of nursing staff who'd grown fond of her vigil. Dot sat in the ICU waiting room, cradling the weakest puppy against her chest while the others slept fitfully in their makeshift carrier. The home equity loan application lay rejected on her lap. The bank's assessment had been swift and brutal. At 67, with no cosigner and insufficient income to support the monthly payments, she represented an unacceptable risk. The irony of being denied the chance to save someone else's family while her own empty house sat as collateral for dreams she'd never pursue felt like cosmic cruelty. Dr. Matthews emerged from Tyler's room with the expression Dot had learned to dread during her nursing career, the careful neutrality that preceded devastating news. "Mrs. Sullivan, Tyler's kidneys are shutting down. The fentanyl was laced with something we haven't identified yet. Possibly a veterinary tranquilizer. His brain activity is minimal." She paused, clearly struggling with professional boundaries. "We need to discuss DNR orders and life support decisions. Since there's no family available." The words hung in the antiseptic air like a death sentence. Tyler was 16 years old, his entire life reduced to mechanical breathing and chemical interventions, while his father remained mysteriously absent despite his son's critical condition. The boy who'd survived multiple overdoses through Lady's intervention was finally facing a battle that love and dedication couldn't win. "Where is Captain Thornton?" Dot demanded, her voice carrying the authority of someone who'd spent decades advocating for patients. "His son is dying, and he needs to be here. I don't care what medical issues or personal problems he's dealing with. Tyler needs his father." Dr. Matthews exchanged glances with Officer Rodriguez, who'd maintained his own vigil since Tyler's admission. The weight of shared knowledge passed between them before Mike finally spoke. "Ma'am, we've tried everything. Jimmy's listed address is a P.O. box that hasn't been checked in months. His cell phone goes straight to voicemail. It's like he vanished completely after his retirement." The systematic erasure of Jimmy Thornton's existence while his son fought for life struck Dot as profoundly wrong. Military families didn't abandon their wounded. You stayed until the battle was won or lost, regardless of personal cost. The man who'd trained Lady to such devotion couldn't simply disappear when his child needed him most. As if sensing the mounting crisis, Lady rose from her position and walked deliberately to the waiting room window. Her behavior shifted into the same alert pattern Dot had witnessed in Forsyth Park. Ears forward, body rigid, focused attention on something beyond normal human perception. But instead of looking toward Gordon Street, Lady's gaze fixed on the hospital parking lot with increasing intensity. "She's doing it again," Dot whispered, recognition sending chills down her spine. "She's tracking something." The transformation in Lady's demeanor was immediate and unmistakable. The grief-stricken dog who'd refused sustenance for 36 hours suddenly became the professional canine officer she'd been trained to be. Her tail lifted slightly, her breathing quickened, and she began the systematic scanning behavior that indicated an active search protocol. Officer Rodriguez noticed the change immediately. "Lady's alerting to something specific. In my experience with K9 units, that level of focus means she's detected a familiar scent or sound." He moved to the window beside the German Shepherd, following her line of sight across the parking lot. "There. That blue sedan that just pulled into the handicapped spot. Driver sitting behind the wheel. Hasn't gotten out." The car sat motionless for several minutes while Lady's agitation increased. Her whimpering took on the desperate quality Dot had heard in the park, but this time it carried a different emotional undertone. Not desperation for help, but frustration at being unable to reach someone who needed to be reached. Dr. Matthews joined them at the window as the sedan's door finally opened. The figure that emerged moved with the careful deliberation of someone managing significant physical pain. Even from 4 stories up, the man's gaunt appearance and labored movements painted a clear picture of advanced illness. He stood beside his car for several minutes, staring up at the hospital building with obvious internal struggle. "Jesus Christ," Officer Rodriguez breathed. "That's Jimmy Thornton." The man in the parking lot bore little resemblance to the decorated police captain from newspaper photos Dot had researched. Cancer had ravaged his frame, leaving him skeletal and fragile, but his posture still carried the disciplined bearing of someone accustomed to command. He was dying. That much was obvious from his careful movements and frequent pauses to rest against his car, but he was here. Lady's response to recognizing her former partner was heartbreaking in its complexity. Joy at seeing Jimmy alive warred with frustration at their separation, professional duty conflicted with emotional need. She began pacing between the window and Tyler's room, clearly torn between 2 impossible loyalties, staying with the boy who needed protection and reuniting with the man she'd served faithfully for years. "He's been here before," Dr. Matthews realized aloud. "The nurses mentioned seeing someone matching that description in our parking lot during Tyler's previous admissions. Always stays in his car, never comes inside." Her voice carried the weight of sudden understanding. "He's been watching over Tyler from a distance, unable to reveal himself but unable to stay completely away." The revelation reframed everything Dot understood about Jimmy Thornton's disappearance. He hadn't abandoned his family. He'd positioned himself as close as his dying condition would allow, while maintaining the fiction that Tyler was alone in the world. The cruelty was intentional and heartbreaking. Better for Tyler to hate a living father than mourn a dying one while struggling with his own demons. But Tyler's current crisis demanded more than distant surveillance. The boy was dying, and the medical team needed family authorization for increasingly desperate interventions. Jimmy's protective deception was now actively preventing him from being the father Tyler needed in his final hours. Dot made a decision that surprised everyone, including herself. "Officer Rodriguez, I need you to go down to that parking lot and arrest Captain Thornton." The young officer stared at her in confusion. "Ma'am, arrest him for what? He hasn't committed any crime that I'm aware of." "Arrest him for abandoning a police K9 officer," Dot replied, her voice carrying the steel of absolute conviction. Lady is still technically SPD property, assigned to Captain Thornton's care. By leaving her to fend for herself while he's still alive, he's violated department regulations regarding canine welfare. She looked directly at Mike Rodriguez, willing him to understand. Sometimes people need an excuse to do what they want to do, but don't have the courage to choose. The legal justification was thin at best, but Officer Rodriguez understood the deeper purpose. Jimmy Thornton was dying in that parking lot, torn between protecting his son from grief and being present for Tyler's final battle. Sometimes duty required creative interpretation when lives hung in the balance. As Officer Rodriguez headed for the elevator, Lady's behavior reached fever pitch. She knew her pack was about to be reunited, but Tyler's critical condition meant timing was everything. The dog who'd orchestrated months of rescue missions through strangers was about to witness the most important reunion she'd ever arranged. If Tyler survived long enough to recognize his father's love beneath the layers of necessary deception. The machines in Tyler's room continued their mechanical rhythm, marking time in a boy's life while his father finally prepared to cross the threshold between protection and presence. Lady positioned herself at the exact center between Tyler's bedside and the window overlooking the parking lot, her body creating a bridge between past and present, duty and love. In the parking lot below, Jimmy Thornton straightened his shoulders one final time and began the longest walk of his life, toward the son who believed himself abandoned and the dog who'd never lost faith in their eventual reunion. The confrontation Tyler had dreaded for 2 years arrived with the mechanical wheeze of hospital elevators and the soft squeak of dying man's shoes on linoleum floors. Officer Rodriguez's arrest had been gentle but firm, a necessary fiction that allowed Jimmy Thornton to surrender his prideful isolation without admitting defeat. Now father and son faced each other across a sterile room filled with machines that measured what remained of a 16-year-old's life. Tyler's first words cut through every justification Jimmy had constructed for his absence. "So you're not dead after all, just a coward." The accusation hung between them like a physical barrier while Lady positioned herself strategically at the foot of Tyler's bed, her body creating a bridge neither man seemed capable of crossing alone. Jimmy's appearance shocked even Dot, who'd spent decades witnessing illness ravage human bodies. The man who'd once commanded respect through physical presence now resembled a living skeleton, his police uniform hanging loose on a frame that cancer had systematically destroyed. "Tyler, I know how this looks," Jimmy began, his voice barely above a whisper. "But I need you to understand why you abandoned me." Tyler's anger provided strength that his failing kidneys couldn't. "Why you dumped Lady and disappeared while I was falling apart. Why you let me think you just didn't give a damn anymore." Each question struck Jimmy like a physical blow, causing him to grip the bedside rail for support. The medical monitors reflected Tyler's emotional distress in racing heartbeats and spiking blood pressure, prompting Dr. Matthews to hover nervously near the medication cart. But Lady's behavior suggested something more complex than simple family dysfunction. The German Shepherd moved deliberately between father and son, nudging Tyler's hand toward Jimmy's, her training recognizing the necessity of physical contact for pack healing. "Son, I've been dying since March 2023, Jimmy said simply. "Pancreatic cancer, stage 4, terminal diagnosis. The doctors gave me 6 months. That was 20 months ago." His matter-of-fact delivery carried the weight of someone who'd accepted his fate completely. "I couldn't put you through watching me waste away while you were fighting your own battles." Tyler's response was immediate and cruel. "So, you decided to let me fight alone instead? You chose your pride over my need for a father?" The words emerged with the kind of venom that only profound hurt could generate. "Do you have any idea what the last 2 years have been like?" Thinking you hated me enough to just walk away? The revelation that Jimmy's disappearance had been motivated by love rather than abandonment seemed to inflame Tyler's rage rather than soothe it. Dot recognized the psychological phenomenon from her nursing experience. Sometimes patients became angrier when they learned their suffering had been preventable or misunderstood. Tyler had built his entire identity around being unwanted. Learning otherwise meant reconstructing his worldview while dying. Jimmy's response surprised everyone in the room. Instead of defensive justification, he pulled out his wallet and began laying items on Tyler's bedside table. A folded newspaper clipping about Tyler's middle school science fair victory, a receipt from Lady's last veterinary appointment with T's graduation fund, written in the memo line, a list of rehab facilities with costs carefully calculated in Jimmy's neat handwriting. "I never stopped being your father," Jimmy said, his voice gaining strength from truth-telling. "I've been to every one of your overdoses, waiting in parking lots while strangers saved your life because I couldn't risk you knowing I was alive. I've paid Lady's informants. Agnes Fletcher gets $50 every time she calls about your condition. I've funded 3 different rehab attempts through anonymous donations because I knew you'd refuse help if you thought it came from me." The systematic nature of Jimmy's secret involvement in Tyler's life painted a picture of love so profound it had required complete self-erasure. But Tyler's addiction-damaged brain struggled to process information that contradicted his fundamental beliefs about abandonment and worthlessness. "You're lying," Tyler whispered, though his conviction wavered as he examined the evidence spread across his bed. "If you cared, you would have stayed. You would have fought for me instead of running away like everyone else." Lady's intervention came at the perfect moment. The German Shepherd jumped onto Tyler's hospital bed, a violation of every regulation she'd been trained to follow, and positioned herself directly between father and son. Her message was unmistakable. The pack was incomplete with any member missing, and healing required unity rather than division. Dr. Matthews started forward to remove Lady from the bed, but Dot caught her arm. "Let her work," Dot said quietly. "That dog has been holding this family together for 2 years. She knows what they need better than we do." Jimmy's breakdown came without warning. The stoic police captain who'd maintained discipline through terminal illness and family destruction simply crumbled under the weight of Tyler's pain. "I'm sorry," he sobbed, reaching across Lady to touch his son's face. "I thought I was protecting you from grief, but I was just protecting myself from saying goodbye." The admission opened floodgates that had been sealed since Jimmy's diagnosis. He told Tyler about the sleepless nights spent researching addiction treatment, about selling his police commendations to fund Lady's care, about the agony of watching from hospital parking lots while his son nearly died repeatedly. Each revelation stripped away another layer of Tyler's anger, revealing the hurt and abandonment that had fueled his self-destruction. But Tyler's response carried its own devastating truth. "Dad, I started using because I thought you didn't love me anymore. Every needle was me trying to kill the part of myself that still hoped you'd come back." His voice broke completely. "I've been trying to die because living without you hurt too much." The circular tragedy of their separation became clear. Jimmy had left to spare Tyler the pain of watching him die, while Tyler had been slowly killing himself from the grief of believing himself unloved. Lady had been the only one holding the family together, using her training and intelligence to orchestrate rescue after rescue while hoping for reconciliation. Jimmy's physical collapse came suddenly, his cancer-ravaged body finally succumbing to the emotional stress of confrontation. As medical staff rushed to stabilize him, Tyler's own vital signs crashed in sympathetic response. Father and son, both dying, both convinced their sacrifice would save the other, both wrong in their fundamental assumptions about love and protection. In the chaos of competing medical emergencies, Lady remained calm at the center of the storm. She'd brought her pack together at last, but the reunion she'd orchestrated through months of desperate intervention was happening too late. Both her humans were slipping away, and no amount of training or devotion could force their bodies to survive what their hearts had endured. Dot watched the tragedy unfold with the helpless recognition of someone who'd lost her own family to circumstances beyond anyone's control. Sometimes love wasn't enough to overcome the damage that good intentions could inflict, and the most devoted hearts could still break under the weight of their own sacrifice. The machines surrounding both beds created a metallic symphony of failing systems, while Lady maintained her vigil between them, still hoping for a miracle that medical science couldn't provide. The miracle arrived at 3:17 a.m. on November 24th, wrapped in the most unlikely package Dot had ever witnessed. She'd been dozing fitfully in the ICU waiting room when commotion from Tyler's room jolted her awake, not the frantic activity of medical emergency, but something that sounded almost like laughter through the institutional walls. Lady's distinctive bark echoed down the hallway, carrying a tone of pure jubilation that hadn't been heard since her police service days. Dr. Matthews emerged from the room with an expression that mixed professional bewilderment with cautious hope. "Mrs. Sullivan, I need you to see this. Tyler's kidney function improved dramatically overnight. His brain activity is normalizing and his vital signs are stable for the first time since admission." She paused, clearly struggling with medical training versus observed reality. "I've never seen anything like it. It's as if his body decided to fight back the moment his father arrived." Inside Tyler's room, the scene defied every expectation Dot had formed about deathbed reconciliations. Tyler sat propped against pillows, still connected to monitors and IV lines, but his eyes held clarity that had been absent since his overdose. Jimmy occupied the chair beside the bed, oxygen cannula providing the support his failing lungs required, but his face showed peaceful determination rather than the desperate grief of impending loss. Lady had positioned herself across both their laps, her body creating a physical bridge between father and son, while her tail wagged with the systematic rhythm of a dog who'd successfully completed her most important mission. The reunion she'd orchestrated through months of careful intervention had finally achieved its intended result, not just bringing them together, but creating the emotional foundation necessary for healing. "Dot," Tyler called softly as she entered the room. His voice carried strength that surprised everyone who'd witnessed his near-death state just hours earlier. "Dad's been telling me about everything. About the cancer, about Lady's training, about all the times you've helped save my life without knowing the whole story." The conversation that followed revealed layers of deception and sacrifice that made Dot's own maternal instincts feel simple by comparison. Jimmy had spent 2 years orchestrating Tyler's protection from a distance, using his police contacts and remaining resources to ensure his son's survival while maintaining the painful fiction of abandonment. Lady had been his primary agent, trained specifically for the mission of keeping Tyler alive until family reconciliation became possible. "I taught Lady emergency response protocols for overdose situations," Jimmy explained, his breathing labored but his voice clear. She knew to find help immediately when Tyler's vital signs became critical, but she also learned to identify people with medical training or strong protective instincts. His eyes met Dot's with profound gratitude. "She chose you specifically, Dot. Your military bearing, your instinctive response to crisis. Lady recognized qualities that made you the perfect person to bridge our family back together." The revelation that Lady had been evaluating potential human allies for months cast the German Shepherd's intelligence in an entirely new light. Her behavior in Forsyth Park hadn't been random desperation. It had been careful recruitment of someone with both the skills and moral character necessary to complete her mission. The puppies had provided emotional leverage, but Lady's primary focus had always been Tyler's survival until reconciliation became possible. But Tyler's recovery brought new challenges that threatened to overshadow the reunion everyone had hoped would solve their problems. The medical bills from his extended ICU stay were astronomical, reaching figures that made Dot's rejected loan application seem almost reasonable by comparison. Without insurance or family assets, Tyler's care had already exceeded $200,000, with costs climbing daily. Dr. Matthews delivered the financial reality with the gentle directness that characterized her bedside manner. Tyler's recovery is remarkable, but he'll need months of rehabilitation therapy, addiction counseling, and ongoing medical supervision. The hospital's billing department is pressuring us to discuss discharge planning and payment arrangements. Jimmy's response revealed the final twist in his elaborate deception. From beneath Tyler's hospital bed, he retrieved a metal lockbox that Lady had apparently been guarding throughout the crisis. Inside, carefully organized in file folders and bank statements, lay the evidence of systematic financial planning that defied his apparent abandonment of family responsibilities. "I've been selling everything I owned for 2 years," Jimmy said simply, spreading documents across Tyler's bedside table. "Police pension, disability payments, personal belongings, even my service medals, everything converted to cash and invested specifically for Tyler's future needs." The documentation revealed accounts totaling nearly $300,000, accumulated through liquidating an entire lifetime of possessions and benefits. Tyler's emotional response to discovering his father's financial sacrifice was immediate and overwhelming. "Dad, you sold everything? Your commendations, Mom's jewelry, the house we grew up in, all for me?" The realization that Jimmy's disappearance had enabled rather than prevented his care shattered Tyler's fundamental assumptions about abandonment and worthlessness. But the most profound revelation came when Jimmy explained the legal arrangements he'd made to protect Tyler's inheritance from his own addiction-driven impulses. "I couldn't give you direct access to money while you were using, son, but I could ensure it would be available when you were ready to accept help rather than resist it." The trust fund Jimmy had established required Tyler's sobriety and active participation in recovery programs before releasing any funds. Rather than enabling destructive behavior, the financial support was structured to encourage the exact healing Tyler needed most. Lady's role as trustee contact, requiring her presence and approval for any disbursements, meant the dog had been protecting Tyler's future as carefully as she'd been protecting his present. Dot found herself witnessing a reconciliation more complex than simple forgiveness between father and son. Tyler's anger at Jimmy's deception gradually transformed into understanding of love so profound it had required apparent cruelty to ensure effectiveness. Jimmy's guilt over abandoning Tyler evolved into pride at his son's resilience and the success of his protective strategy. "I need to tell you something, Dad," Tyler said, his voice steady despite the emotional weight of confession. "I started using because I thought losing you meant I wasn't worth loving. Every overdose was me trying to prove that theory right." He reached across Lady to grasp Jimmy's hand. "But Lady kept saving me, kept bringing people who cared, kept showing me that maybe I was wrong about being worthless." Jimmy's response carried the weight of paternal love tested by impossible circumstances. "Son, you were never worthless. You were worth every sacrifice, every deception, every moment of pain I endured to keep you alive." Lady knew that even when we forgot it ourselves. The three-way reconciliation that followed father, son, and dog created an emotional foundation strong enough to support Tyler's recovery journey. Lady's systematic protection had provided time for healing to become possible, but the real work of rebuilding their family relationship was just beginning. Dr. Matthews returned with discharge planning documents that reflected Tyler's improved prognosis and newly available financial resources. Tyler's medical team recommends a 90-day inpatient rehabilitation program followed by intensive outpatient counseling and family therapy. With proper support, his long-term recovery prospects are excellent. As the medical staff prepared transfer arrangements to a specialized addiction treatment facility, Lady's behavior shifted once again. The urgent vigilance that had characterized her 2-year protection mission gave way to the calm satisfaction of a job well done. She'd successfully reunited her pack and ensured Tyler's survival until professional help could take over. But Dot's role in their story was far from finished. Jimmy's cancer remained terminal despite Tyler's recovery, and the boy would need ongoing support that his dying father couldn't provide indefinitely. The trust fund could cover medical expenses and education, but Tyler's emotional needs required family connections that transcended financial arrangements. "Dot," Jimmy said quietly as Tyler dozed between them, "I need to ask you something important. Tyler's going to need someone when I'm gone. Not just legal guardianship, but real family connection. Would you consider being his grandmother?" The question carried implications that extended far beyond temporary assistance during crisis. Jimmy was asking Dot to commit to long-term family membership to provide the stable foundation Tyler would need during recovery and beyond. At 67, with her own financial limitations and advancing age, accepting such responsibility represented a fundamental life change. But watching Lady's peaceful expression as she maintained her protective position between 3 generations of her chosen pack, Dot realized she'd already made the decision weeks ago in Forsyth Park. Some commitments transcended rational calculation, rooted instead in recognition of where love and purpose intersected. "Jimmy, I lost my daughter 5 years ago, and I've been dying of loneliness ever since," she replied with quiet certainty. "Tyler and Lady saved my life as much as I saved theirs. Of course, I'll be his grandmother." 6 months later, the morning sun streamed through the windows of Dot's Victorian home on Bull Street, illuminating a scene that would have seemed impossible during those desperate November days in Forsyth Park. Tyler sat at the kitchen table, textbooks spread before him as he worked through his high school equivalency practice tests, while Lady dozed contentedly at his feet. The German Shepherd's once desperate vigilance had evolved into peaceful supervision, her professional duty transformed into family devotion. The transformation in Tyler was remarkable by any measure. Clean for 127 days, according to the sobriety app on his phone, he'd gained 25 healthy pounds and developed the kind of focused determination that reminded Dot of Jimmy's police officer bearing. The rehabilitation program had been grueling. 90 days of intensive therapy, medical monitoring, and psychological counseling. But Tyler had approached recovery with the same systematic dedication Lady had shown during her protection mission. "Grandmother Dot," Tyler called, using the title that had evolved naturally from their legal guardianship arrangement. "I got my SAT scores back yesterday. 1340. Enough for state university admission if I want it." His pride was tempered by the knowledge that academic achievement meant nothing without sustained sobriety. But the accomplishment represented progress that would have been impossible during his addiction. Jimmy's condition had stabilized remarkably since the family reconciliation, though his cancer remained terminal. The oncology team attributed his extended survival to reduced stress and renewed purpose, but Dot suspected the healing power of restored family bonds played a larger role than medical science could measure. He'd moved into the spare bedroom of Dot's house, creating the 3-generation household that Lady had somehow envisioned during her desperate recruitment mission. The financial arrangements Jimmy had established proved even more comprehensive than initially revealed. Beyond the trust fund for Tyler's immediate needs, he'd structured educational accounts, medical insurance policies, and long-term investment strategies that would support Tyler's future well into adulthood. The systematic nature of his planning revealed the depth of paternal love that had motivated his apparent abandonment. "Dad's teaching me about financial responsibility," Tyler explained as he showed Dot the budgeting worksheets Jimmy had created. "He says money without wisdom is just another form of addiction. It can destroy you as easily as drugs if you don't understand its proper purpose." The lessons extended beyond mere accounting to encompass values of service, sacrifice, and stewardship that reflected Jimmy's police officer ethics. Ladies' Five Puppies had found homes with carefully selected families throughout Savannah, each placement orchestrated by Jimmy's network of police contacts who understood the special nature of Lady's offspring. The German Shepherd seemed content with the separations, visiting her grown children regularly during neighborhood walks, while maintaining her primary focus on Tyler's continued well-being. The most profound change was visible in Dot herself. The lonely widow who'd been slowly dying of purposelessness had transformed into the energetic matriarch of an unconventional but devoted family. Her nursing skills found daily application in managing Jimmy's medical needs, while her maternal instincts flourished in guiding Tyler's recovery journey. The house that had echoed with memories of loss now resonated with the sounds of healing and growth. "I never understood why Sarah had to die," Dot confided to Jimmy one evening as they watched Tyler practice driving in the front yard under Lady's watchful supervision. "But maybe her death prepared me to save Tyler's life. Maybe grief taught me to recognize when someone else was drowning in pain." The theological implications of suffering as preparation for service provided comfort that traditional explanations of loss had never offered. Jimmy's response reflected the spiritual growth that terminal illness had fostered. Maybe Lady understood something we didn't, that broken people can heal each other if they're willing to risk loving again. She saw that Tyler needed a mother figure and you needed a purpose. Her mission wasn't just keeping him alive, it was rebuilding family for everyone who'd lost theirs. The Rehabilitation Center's family therapy sessions had revealed patterns of healing that extended beyond individual recovery to encompass generational trauma and inherited resilience. Tyler's addiction hadn't emerged in isolation. It was connected to family systems of service, sacrifice, and emotional suppression that characterized both military and law enforcement cultures. Understanding these patterns allowed for healing approaches that addressed root causes rather than just symptoms. Dr. Matthews, who'd maintained contact with the family throughout Tyler's recovery, marveled at the medical outcomes that defied conventional prognosis. Tyler's brain scans show complete restoration of function in areas damaged by repeated overdoses. Jimmy's cancer markers have remained stable for months beyond predicted survival time. There's something about family reconciliation that activates healing mechanisms we don't fully understand. The legal formalities of Tyler's guardianship had been surprisingly complex, requiring court approval for the unusual arrangement of an elderly woman assuming responsibility for a teenage addiction survivor. But the social worker assigned to their case recognized the extraordinary circumstances and recommended approval based on Tyler's remarkable progress and the family's obvious devotion to his well-being. Community response to their story had been overwhelmingly positive, with local media coverage inspiring donations to support other families dealing with addiction and abandonment. The Savannah Police Department established the Ladies' Legacy Fund to provide emergency assistance for K-9 officers' families facing medical crises, ensuring that future situations wouldn't require the desperate measures Jimmy had employed. Tyler's decision to pursue law enforcement studies surprised no one who'd witnessed his transformation. "I want to help other families avoid what we went through," he explained during his university application interviews. "Dad and Lady taught me that service means sacrifice, but it doesn't have to mean isolation. Sometimes the best way to protect people is to stay close enough to love them through their worst moments." The approaching one-year anniversary of Tyler's last overdose carried special significance for their household. Jimmy had lived far beyond his original prognosis. Tyler had exceeded every recovery milestone, and Lady had transitioned from desperate protector to contented family dog. The German Shepherd's mission was complete, but her legacy extended far beyond the immediate family she'd saved. On Christmas morning, Tyler surprised everyone by presenting Lady with a custom collar bearing a new inscription: Lady Thornton Sullivan, Family Guardian, Retired with Honor. The ceremony, conducted in Dot's living room with Jimmy officiating despite his weakened condition, formally recognized Lady's transition from police service to family service while acknowledging her extraordinary dedication to both duties. Jimmy's final gift to Tyler came in the form of a handwritten letter, sealed and marked for Tyler's 21st birthday. The envelope's weight suggested substantial content, but Jimmy insisted it remain unopened until Tyler achieved full legal adulthood and 5 years of sustained sobriety. The gesture represented faith in Tyler's continued recovery and Jimmy's acceptance that his paternal guidance had prepared his son for independent success. The house on Bull Street had become an unofficial gathering place for others touched by addiction, abandonment, or loss. Agnes Fletcher visited daily, bringing homemade meals and neighborhood gossip that connected their unconventional family to the broader community. Officer Rodriguez stopped by regularly, sharing Lady's former colleagues with updates on her retirement and Tyler's progress. As winter gave way to spring, Jimmy's condition began its inevitable decline, but the approach of death held none of the terror that had initially driven his deceptive disappearance. Tyler's recovery was secure, Dot's guardianship was legal and loving, and Lady's continued vigilance ensured that family bonds would survive his passing. "I used to think love meant protecting people from pain," Jimmy reflected during one of his final conversations with Dot. "But Lady taught me that love means staying close enough to help them heal from pain they can't avoid." His words carried the wisdom of someone who'd learned the difference between protection and presence through nearly losing everything that mattered most. The story that had begun with a desperate dog begging strangers for help had evolved into a testament to the healing power of chosen family, unconditional loyalty, and love that transcends conventional boundaries. Lady's original mission, keeping Tyler alive until reconciliation became possible, had succeeded beyond her canine comprehension, creating connections that would endure long after her active protection was no longer needed. In the garden behind Dot's Victorian home, 3 generations sat together in the evening twilight. An elderly woman who'd found her purpose, a dying man who'd found his peace, a recovering young man who'd found his future, and a German shepherd who'd found her pack complete at last. Dear friends, Lady's story reminds us that it's never too late for second chances at family. At 67, Dorothy thought her nurturing days were over. Her house echoed with loneliness. Her purpose seemed finished. But when a desperate German shepherd led her to a dying boy, everything changed. Sometimes God places broken people in our path, not as burdens, but as blessings, waiting to unfold. Dorothy discovered that her empty nest wasn't an ending. It was preparation for becoming the grandmother she never knew she was meant to be. Tyler found sobriety through unconditional love. Jimmy found peace through honest reconciliation. Lady found her greatest mission accomplished. And Dorothy? She found that her most important years weren't behind her. They were just beginning. The medical bills, sleepless nights, and daily challenges became investments in a family she chose rather than inherited. Her Social Security check stretched further when it fed hearts hungry for belonging rather than just her own survival. Your wisdom, your experience, your capacity for love, these aren't retirement gifts to be stored away. They're tools for building the families that need you most. Have you ever felt like your nurturing years were over? What would you risk to help someone who desperately needed family? Share your thoughts below. Your story might inspire someone else's second chance.